History is never a straight path. It twists, bends, and doubles back on itself, shaping nations in ways that are often painful and unpredictable. The story of Russia and Ukraine is one of the most striking examples of this truth. To the outside world, these two nations may seem like close relatives, sharing language, faith, and traditions. But beneath the surface lies a history of tension, domination, and resistance that has stretched across centuries. To truly understand the conflict shaking our world today, we must first understand how it all began. Ukraine, a land of fertile plains, winding rivers, and rich black soil, has always been a crossroads of empires. Its geography made it a prize, but also a battlefield. For centuries, armies marched across these lands. Rulers claimed dominion, and yet the people of Ukraine preserved a unique identity, one that would never fully disappear, no matter the hardship. At the heart of this history lies Kievan Rus, a medieval state that flourished over 1,000 years ago. Both Russia and Ukraine trace their origins to this kingdom, and both claim it as their heritage. But heritage can bind or divide. Over time, this shared beginning became a source of rivalry, as each nation sought to define itself as the rightful heir of Rus. The relationship between these two nations has never been simple. Brotherhood and betrayal, shared victories and bitter losses, unity and oppression, these are the rhythms of their history. The modern war between Russia and Ukraine is not only about politics or territory, it is about identity, memory, and the echoes of centuries past. And so, to make sense of this modern tragedy, we must journey back to the foggy rivers of the Dnieper, back to golden domes rising above ancient Kiev, back to the time when both Russia and Ukraine were yet unborn, and only Kievan Rus held sway. This is where the story begins. This is where the roots of conflict lie, buried deep in the soil of history.
Nearly 1,000 years ago, long before the words Russia or Ukraine ever appeared on maps, there was Kievan Rus. This was not just a kingdom, but a cradle of Slavic civilization. Its heart was the city of Kiev, resting on the banks of the Dnieper River. Traders from Scandinavia, Byzantium, and the steppes passed through here, carrying silk, furs, and ideas. The Dnieper was a highway of culture, and Kiev was its golden jewel. For Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians alike, Kievan Rus represents a common origin story. But over centuries, the memory of this kingdom became less of a shared inheritance and more of a contested legacy. Both Russia and Ukraine would look back to this medieval past and say, "This is where we began. This is where we belong." In the 10th century, Prince Volodymyr the Great made a decision that would ripple through history. He converted to Christianity and baptized his people in the Dnieper River. With that, Kievan Rus became tied to the Byzantine world, a bridge between East and West. The domes of Kiev's cathedrals gleamed like fire against the sky, signaling a civilization both proud and powerful. But glory is never eternal. By the 13th century, Mongol armies swept across the plains, destroying cities and shattering the fragile unity of Rus. Kiev burned, and from its ashes, new powers rose: Moscow in the north, Lithuania and Poland in the west. Ukraine found itself pulled between competing powers, while Moscow would eventually claim to be the Third Rome, the sole heir of Orthodox Rus. Here lies one of the deepest fractures. While Russia built its imperial identity on the claim of succession from Rus, Ukraine remembered Kiev as its own mother city, its own beginning.
As Kiev weakened, Ukraine became a frontier, a land between worlds. To the west, it was absorbed by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. To the east, Moscow's power grew steadily. For Ukrainians, this was a time of shifting masters, yet also of cultural flowering. The Cossacks, fierce warriors of the steppe, rose as defenders of Ukrainian identity. They lived freely along the Dnieper, resisting both foreign domination and internal oppression. In the mid-17th century, Bogdan Khmelnytsky led a massive Cossack uprising against Polish rule. Seeking allies, he turned to Moscow for protection. In 1654, the Treaty of Pereyaslav was signed, and with it, Ukraine tied its fate to Russia. What began as an alliance would soon become a cage. For Moscow, this treaty was the foundation of its claim to Ukraine. For Ukrainians, it was seen differently, a deal of necessity, not surrender. But as years passed, Moscow tightened control. Ukrainian autonomy shrank, and the Cossacks, who once fought for freedom, saw their privileges stripped away. The tension of this period is one we still feel today. Was Ukraine forever bound to Russia by this treaty, or was it tricked into subjugation? That question has haunted centuries of politics and war.
By the 18th and 19th centuries, Ukraine was firmly under the grip of the Russian Empire. Kiev became a provincial city, while Moscow, and later St. Petersburg, dictated the future of the land once called Rus. Catherine the Great abolished the last Cossack strongholds, erasing centuries of self-rule. Ukrainian language was banned in schools and publications. To be Ukrainian became something to be hidden, something whispered at home but forbidden in public. And yet, identities do not vanish so easily. Writers, poets, and intellectuals began a quiet resistance through culture. Taras Shevchenko, Ukraine's national poet, turned his verses into weapons, reminding his people of their history and dignity. Folk songs, embroidery, and traditions became acts of defiance against imperial assimilation. Russia saw Ukraine as Little Russia, a younger sibling meant to follow. But Ukrainians increasingly resisted this narrative. The empire could control laws and armies, but it could not erase memory, nor the longing for self-determination. In the soil of repression, seeds of nationalism were taking root, seeds that would grow stronger with every attempt to silence them.
The dawn of the 20th century brought storms to both Russia and Ukraine. The Russian Empire trembled under the weight of revolution, and Ukrainians seized the moment. In 1917, as the Russian Tsar fell, Ukraine declared independence. For the first time in centuries, a Ukrainian state was reborn, fragile but real. Yet freedom was short-lived. Civil war raged, the Red Army advanced. By 1921, Ukraine was pulled into the Soviet Union, its independence crushed under the hammer and sickle. The promises of equality and fraternity gave way to harsh reality. Perhaps the darkest chapter came in the 1930s during the Holodomor, the man-made famine under Stalin. Grain was seized, villages starved, and millions perished. For Ukrainians, this was not just tragedy, it was remembered as deliberate destruction of their people. Even today, the Holodomor stands as a scar that shapes Ukrainian identity and its mistrust of Moscow. World War II brought further agony. Nazi invasion turned Ukraine into one of the bloodiest battlefields of the war. Millions of Ukrainians fought against Hitler, yet the shadow of Soviet domination returned once the war ended. Ukraine was rebuilt, but always under Moscow's watchful eye.
In Soviet times, Moscow promoted the idea of fraternal nations, Russia and Ukraine united under socialism.
Propaganda posters showed happy workers arm in arm. But beneath the slogans, resentment simmered. Ukraine was vital to the Soviet Union. Its fertile soil fed the nation. Its factories built steel and machinery. Its culture added richness to the Soviet image abroad. But at home, Ukrainians felt suppressed. Language policies kept Russian dominant. Dissidents who spoke of independence were silenced, imprisoned, or worse. Yet the Soviet era also brought modernization, urbanization, and shared victories. Ukrainians helped launch rockets into space, built cities anew, and carried medals from the Great Patriotic War. It was a time of contradictions, progress paired with control, pride mixed with fear. The bond between Russia and Ukraine in the Soviet era was complicated, like two relatives forced to live together in the same house, one holding the keys, the other longing to step outside.
The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 changed everything. On August 24th, Ukraine declared independence. Crowds filled Kyiv streets, waving blue and yellow flags that had been hidden for decades. For the first time in generations, Ukraine was free. Russia, too, faced turmoil, but many in Moscow struggled to accept the loss of Ukraine. For centuries, Ukraine had been considered part of Russia's identity, its empire, its destiny. Now it was a sovereign nation choosing its own path. In the years that followed, Ukraine wrestled with corruption, economic hardship, and political instability. Yet each crisis only deepened its people's desire for independence. Ukrainians increasingly looked westward, toward Europe, democracy, and integration. This choice would become a point of growing conflict with Russia, which saw it as a betrayal. The 1990s ended with an uneasy peace, but storm clouds were already gathering. The bond between Russia and Ukraine was breaking, and the fracture lines would soon erupt into open conflict.
The 21st century was a turning point. In 2004, the Orange Revolution erupted after fraudulent elections. Ukrainians demanded democracy, freedom, and fairness. Once again, Kyiv's Independence Square became a symbol of defiance. In 2013-2014, history repeated on an even greater scale. When Ukraine's government turned away from a deal with the European Union, millions took to the streets in protest. The movement, known as Euromaidan, was not just about trade agreements, it was about identity. Ukrainians wanted to define themselves as European, not as Russia's satellite. But Moscow saw this as a direct threat. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, a move that shocked the world. Armed conflict erupted in eastern Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists declared breakaway regions. What had once been a political struggle was now a war, leaving thousands dead and millions displaced. This was the moment when the relationship between Russia and Ukraine broke beyond repair. From then on, war was no longer a possibility, it was a reality.
On February 24, 2022, the world awoke to a new nightmare. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Missiles rained on Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol. Tanks crossed borders, soldiers marched, and millions of civilians fled their homes. The invasion was meant to be quick. Moscow believed Ukraine would collapse in days. Instead, the world watched in awe as Ukrainians resisted with unyielding courage. Ordinary citizens took up arms. Farmers towed abandoned tanks. Families sheltered in subway stations while singing their anthem. The war turned cities into ruins, Mariupol's theaters, Kharkiv's neighborhoods, Bucha's mass graves. Yet amid the horror, Ukraine's identity only grew stronger. The blue and yellow flag became a global symbol of resistance as nations rallied to support. For Russia, this war was framed as reclaiming history. For Ukraine, it was survival, proof that it was not Little Russia, but a proud, independent nation defending its very right to exist.
The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is not simply about borders. It is about history, centuries of shared beginnings, betrayals, domination, and resistance. From Kievan Rus to the Mongol invasions, from Cossack treaties to imperial suppression, from famine to war, from independence to invasion, every chapter of this story is layered with pain, resilience, and determination. The lesson of this history is clear. Identity cannot be erased, no matter how powerful the empire, no matter how long the domination. Ukraine's story proves that a people's spirit can endure, can rise again, and can defy even the greatest odds. And so today, as the world watches, we are not just witnessing a war, we are witnessing history repeating itself. A struggle for freedom against subjugation, for dignity against domination, for the right to exist. This is not only the story of Russia and Ukraine, it is the story of humanity, of every nation that has ever fought to define itself. And it is far from over.